The sound of high heels clicking across my hardwood floors at 3 in the morning should have been my first warning. I sat up in what used to be my guest bedroom, now my permanent residence since my son Marcus brought home his new wife 6 months ago. The clicking stopped right outside my door, followed by whispered voices and muffled laughter. Then I heard it clearly through the thin walls. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. When do you think the old bat will finally kick the bucket? This house is worth at least $2 million now. My blood turned to ice. That was Sophia's voice, my daughter-in-law of barely half a year, discussing my death like she was planning a grocery list. I pressed my ear closer to the door, my heart hammering against my ribs. "Shh, keep it down," Marcus whispered back. "She might hear you." "So what if she does? What's she going to do, ground me?" Sophia's laugh was sharp and cruel. "Your mother already handed over the deed when we got married. She's got nowhere to go and no one to turn to. Face it, Marcus, this house is ours now. We just have to wait for nature to take its course." The footsteps resumed, moving toward the master bedroom that had been mine for 37 years until Sophia decided it wasn't suitable for an elderly woman. The same master bedroom where I'd raised Marcus alone after his father died when he was 12. The same bedroom where I'd worked late into countless nights, building my accounting firm from nothing to support us both. My name is Betty Davis, and at 62 years old, I thought I'd earned the right to live peacefully in the home I'd spent decades paying for. I thought my son would protect me, honor me, maybe even appreciate the sacrifices I'd made to give him every opportunity in life. I was wrong on all counts. The morning after overhearing Sophia's charming declaration, I made my coffee in the kitchen that she'd already started redecorating without asking my permission. Gone were my grandmother's vintage canisters, replaced with sleek stainless steel containers that looked like they belonged in a laboratory. The warm yellow walls I'd painted myself had been covered with cold gray paint that made the whole room feel like a morgue. "Good morning, Betty," Sophia chirped as she glided into the kitchen wearing a silk robe that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. Everything about Sophia screamed expensive, from her professionally highlighted hair to her perfectly manicured nails that had never seen a day of honest work. At 28, she was young enough to be mistaken for Marcus's sister, a fact that clearly delighted her and mortified me. "It's Mrs. Davis," I corrected quietly, stirring sugar into my coffee. I'd asked her to call me Mom when they first got married, back when I still believed she might genuinely care about my son. That naive hope had died quickly. "Oh, right, sorry," she said with a smile that never reached her eyes. "I keep forgetting how formal you prefer things." She opened the refrigerator and pulled out a green smoothie that probably cost $20 at whatever trendy health bar she frequented. "Marcus and I were thinking we should update the basement a bit more. Make it more comfortable for you. Maybe add a mini fridge so you don't have to come upstairs as much." The basement. 6 months ago, I'd been sleeping in the master bedroom I'd occupied for over 3 decades. Then Sophia had started complaining about the noise my television made, how my reading lamp disturbed their sleep through the walls, how my medications cluttered their bathroom. One complaint led to another until somehow I found myself relocated to what used to be Marcus's childhood playroom in the basement. "That's very thoughtful," I managed, though my hands trembled slightly around my coffee mug. "But I'm quite comfortable with the current arrangements." Sophia's smile grew wider, predatory. "Oh, but Betty, we insist. After all, we want you to be happy here. This is your home too." The emphasis she placed on "too" made it clear exactly how temporary she considered my residence. Marcus stumbled into the kitchen still wearing his pajamas, his hair sticking up at odd angles. My heart ached looking at him. At 35, he should have been thriving in his career as a software engineer, maybe starting a family of his own. Instead, he looked perpetually exhausted, constantly stressed, and increasingly distant from me. Sophia had a way of consuming all the air in any room she entered, leaving little space for anyone else to breathe. "Morning, Mom," he mumbled, barely making eye contact as he reached for the coffee pot. Your mother and I were just discussing some improvements to the basement, Sophia said, wrapping her arms around Marcus's waist from behind in a gesture that was clearly meant to stake her territorial claim. I think she'd be much more comfortable with her own little space down there. More privacy, you know. Marcus nodded absently, already checking his phone for work emails. Whatever you think is best, Soph. You have great taste. I watched this exchange with growing clarity. My son, the boy I'd raised to be independent and strong, had been reduced to a nodding puppet in his own home. Sophia pulled his strings, and he danced accordingly, apparently forgetting that this had been my home long before either of them existed in my daily life. Well, I said, setting down my empty mug with perhaps more force than necessary, I should let you two plan your renovations. I have some errands to run today. As I headed toward the basement stairs to get dressed, I heard Sophia whisper to Marcus, "See how defensive she gets? I'm just trying to help, and she acts like I'm attacking her." I paused on the top step, listening to my son's response. She's probably just having a hard time adjusting. Give her time. Time. As if I were the problem that needed adjusting to, rather than the woman who'd been forced out of her own bedroom, her own kitchen, her own life. I descended the narrow wooden stairs to my new accommodations, each step echoing with the weight of my growing resentment. The basement had been transformed from Marcus's childhood playground into a makeshift studio apartment that would have been illegal to rent to tenants. The ceiling was too low, the windows too small, and the concrete walls remained perpetually damp, despite my attempts to improve the ventilation. My queen-sized bed barely fit in the space, surrounded by boxes of my belongings that Sophia had deemed unnecessary for the main house. My grandmother's china, my collection of first-edition novels, 37 years of memories packed away like storage unit contents. I sat on the edge of my bed and pulled out my phone, scrolling through my contact list until I found the name I was looking for. Rebecca Martinez had been my attorney for 15 years, handling everything from my business contracts to my estate planning. She'd also become a trusted friend, one of the few people who'd known me before I became simply Marcus's mother. "Rebecca, it's Betty Davis. I need to schedule an appointment with you, today, if possible." "Betty, of course. Is everything all right? You sound stressed." I looked around my basement prison, listening to the sound of Sophia's heels clicking across my hardwood floors above my head. Let's just say I need to review some of my legal documents. There may be some changes I want to make. Rebecca's office was located in the same downtown building where I'd once rented space for my accounting firm. Walking through those familiar halls brought back memories of the woman I used to be before I allowed myself to be reduced to an inconvenient elderly relative in my own home. Rebecca's secretary, a cheerful woman named Maria, greeted me warmly and ushered me into the familiar comfort of Rebecca's office. "You look terrible," Rebecca said without preamble as I settled into the leather chair across from her desk. At 55, Rebecca possessed the kind of sharp intelligence that had made her one of the most successful estate.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story.
Joni's in the city. Her dark eyes missed nothing, and right now they were focused on me with concern. "Thank you for the honest assessment," I replied dryly. "I feel about as good as I look. Talk to me, what's going on?" I found myself telling Rebecca everything. The gradual takeover of my home, the relegation to the basement, the conversation I'd overheard the night before about my timely demise. Rebecca listened without interrupting, her expression growing increasingly grim as my story unfolded. "Let me make sure I understand this correctly," she said when I finished. "You transferred the deed to your house to Marcus when he got married 6 months ago?" "Joint ownership," I clarified. "I wanted to help them get started, and Sophia convinced me it would be better for tax purposes. She said her father's financial advisor recommended it." Rebecca's jaw tightened. "And this transfer included your name on the deed as well?" "Yes, all 3 of our names are listed as owners." "Good. That complicates things for them considerably." Rebecca pulled out a legal pad and began making notes. Tell me about your financial situation. Do you have other assets besides the house? I nodded. My retirement accounts, some savings, the proceeds from selling my accounting firm 5 years ago. Everything is currently set up to pass to Marcus in my will. How much are we talking about total? Approximately $4 million, not including the house. Rebecca's pen stopped moving. $4 million? Betty, why didn't you ever mention the full extent of your assets before? It never seemed relevant. I live simply, I don't need much. I always assumed Marcus would inherit everything when I passed away naturally, hopefully many years from now. And now, I thought about Sophia's voice in the hallway, her casual cruelty as she discussed my death like an anticipated windfall. Now I'm wondering if I should reconsider my assumptions about family loyalty. Rebecca leaned back in her chair, studying me carefully. What exactly are you thinking, Betty? I'm thinking that maybe it's time to remind certain people that generosity shouldn't be mistaken for weakness, and that legal ownership doesn't always translate to practical control. A slow smile spread across Rebecca's face. Now you're talking. Let me ask you something. How attached are you to that house? It's been my home for 37 years. I raised my son there. I built my life there. That's not what I asked. I asked how attached you are to keeping it. I considered the question carefully. The house had been my sanctuary, my refuge, my pride. But now it felt like a prison, with Sophia as my warden and Marcus as her willing accomplice. The memories that had once brought me comfort now felt tainted by the reality of my current situation. I suppose, I said slowly, that a house is only a home when you're welcome in it. Exactly. Now let me explain a few legal concepts that might interest you. For the next hour, Rebecca outlined various scenarios and strategies, each more intriguing than the last. By the time I left her office, I had a comprehensive understanding of my options and a preliminary plan that would have made my late husband proud. He'd always said I had a mind for strategy when I decided to use it. The drive home took me through the neighborhood where I'd lived for decades, past houses where I'd watched children grow up and families change. Mrs. Henderson was working in her garden as I passed, and she waved enthusiastically. At 84, she still maintained her own home, her own independence, her own dignity. The contrast with my current situation wasn't lost on me. I pulled into my driveway and sat in my car for a moment, looking at the house I'd worked so hard to afford. The mortgage had taken 15 years to pay off, through lean times when clients were scarce, and Marcus needed school clothes and soccer cleats. I'd painted every room myself, installed the hardwood floors during a particularly ambitious weekend, planted the garden that Sophia had already begun redesigning without consultation. Marcus's car was gone, but Sophia's white BMW sat in what used to be my spot in the garage. Another small displacement that had happened gradually, one compromise at a time, until I found myself parking in the driveway of my own home like a visitor. The front door was locked, which was new. For 37 years, I'd never locked my front door during the day. But Sophia had strong opinions about security, despite the fact that we lived in one of the safest neighborhoods in the city. I fumbled for my keys, feeling like a stranger trying to gain entry to my own life. "Oh, you're back," Sophia said as I entered. She was sitting at my dining room table with her laptop open, surrounded by fabric samples and paint swatches. "I hope you don't mind, I'm working on some design ideas for the living room. I think it's time to update the decor. Everything feels so outdated." The living room in question contained furniture I'd carefully selected and saved for over the years. The antique secretary desk where I'd balanced my business books. The reading chair where I'd spent countless evenings with novels and tea. The family photos that chronicled Marcus's childhood. All of it apparently was outdated and in need of Sophia's modern touch. "Of course," I said carefully. "It's your home too." "Exactly," Sophia beamed as if I'd just agreed to fund her shopping spree. "I knew you'd understand. Marcus is sometimes a little too sentimental about changing things, but you strike me as more practical." I studied her face, looking for any sign that she remembered our conversation from the kitchen that morning, any awareness that her words the night before might have been overheard. But Sophia's expression remained pleasantly vacant, as if discussing my death and her inheritance was just another item on her to-do list. "I am practical," I agreed. sometimes more than people realize. That's wonderful. Oh, and I meant to ask you earlier, Marcus and I are having some friends over for dinner this Saturday night. Nothing too fancy, just 8 or 10 people. I hope that won't be a problem for you. The phrasing was interesting. Not an invitation to join them, but a warning that I'd be expected to make myself scarce during their entertaining. In my own home, I was being asked to accommodate their social calendar. Will you need help with the preparations? I offered, curious to see how far her audacity extended. Oh, that's sweet of you to offer, but I've already arranged for catering. I wouldn't want to put you to any trouble. Her tone suggested that my help would be more hindrance than assistance. Although, if you wouldn't mind staying downstairs during the party, that would be helpful. Some of Marcus's colleagues will be here, and you know how awkward it can be when parents are hovering around. Parents. Hovering. In my own home, I was being characterized as an intrusive presence who might embarrass her husband at his own dinner party. The woman who had raised that husband, supported his education, cheered at his graduation, and provided the home where he was now entertaining his colleagues. Of course, I said again, my voice steady despite the fury building in my chest. I understand completely. You're such a gem, Betty. I'm so glad we understand each other. I excused myself and retreated to the basement, closing the door behind me with deliberate care. Understanding, indeed. I was beginning to understand a great deal more than Sophia realized. That evening, Marcus returned home in his usual state of exhausted distraction. I could hear him and Sophia discussing their day over dinner in the dining room above my head. The conversation was punctuated by Sophia's frequent laughter and Marcus's occasional chuckles. They sounded like any normal couple sharing a meal and planning their evening, except for the fact that they were doing so in a house where the original owner had been relegated to hiding in the basement like an unwanted secret. Around 9 o'clock, I heard Marcus's footsteps on the basement stairs. He knocked briefly before opening the door, a courtesy that had developed over the past few months as my living space became increasingly separated from the rest of the house. Hey, Mom, how was your day? He stood awkwardly in the doorway, not quite entering my space, but not remaining entirely outside it either. This physical hesitation seemed to represent our entire relationship lately. Present, but distant. Caring, but constrained. It was productive, I said, looking up from the book I'd been pretending to read. I had lunch with Rebecca Martinez. We discussed some legal matters. Oh? Nothing serious, I hope. Just reviewing some documents, making sure everything is in order. Marcus nodded absently, already shifting his weight as if preparing to leave. That's good. It's important to stay on top of those things. Marcus, I said before he could escape back upstairs, are you happy? The question seemed to surprise him. He actually stepped into the room and sat down on the small chair that served as my only seating besides the bed. Happy? I mean, yes. Why wouldn't I be? You seem stressed lately. Tired. I worry about you. Work's been crazy, but that's normal. Sophia keeps me busy with social stuff on the weekends, but that's good for my career. Networking, you know? I studied my son's face, looking for traces of the boy I'd raised. Marcus had always been introspective, thoughtful. Someone who preferred quiet evenings with books or video games to large social gatherings. The man sitting in front of me seemed to be playing a role rather than living authentically. Do you remember when you were 12 and your father died? I asked. Marcus's expression softened. Of course. You told me you were going to take care of me when you grew up. You said you'd make sure I was never alone or scared again. Mom. He shifted uncomfortably in his chair. I'm not trying to make you feel guilty, sweetheart. I'm just wondering if you remember making that promise. Things are different now. I have responsibilities to Sophia, to our marriage. You raised me to be independent, and that's what I'm doing. Independence is important, I agreed, but so is remembering where you came from, and treating the people who love you with respect. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, and I could see him wrestling with something internal. Finally, he looked up at me with an expression that reminded me of the boy he used to be. Are you unhappy here, Mom? I mean, really unhappy? The question hung in the air between us, heavy with implications. This was my chance to tell him everything. About the conversation I'd overheard, about feeling unwelcome in my own home, about his wife's calculations regarding my death. But looking at his face, I realized that forcing him to choose between his mother and his wife would only create resentment, regardless of which choice he made. "I'm adjusting," I said carefully. "Change is always difficult at my age. Maybe we could look into getting you a nice apartment somewhere. Something closer to your friends, easier to maintain. This house is probably too much work for you anyway." And there it was, the gentle suggestion that I remove myself from their lives entirely, packaged as concern for my well-being. I wondered if this was Marcus's own idea or something Sophia had planted in his mind during their private conversations. "That's thoughtful of you to consider," I said, "but I'm not ready to make that kind of change just yet." Marcus nodded, though he looked relieved that I hadn't immediately agreed to his suggestion. "Of course, no pressure. Just something to think about." After he left, I sat in the gathering darkness of my basement room and thought about the choices that had led me to this moment. Every decision had been made with love, with the intention of helping my son build a successful life. The business I'd built to support us, the sacrifices I'd made to ensure his education, the house I'd worked to provide, all of it had been my gift to him. But gifts, I was learning, could become weapons in the wrong hands. My generosity had been interpreted as weakness, my love as obligation, my presence as inconvenience. Sophia saw me as an obstacle to her inheritance, and Marcus saw me as a problem to be managed rather than a mother to be honored. I picked up my phone and scrolled through the photos I'd taken over the years. Marcus's graduation from college, his first job, holidays and birthdays, and ordinary Sunday dinners. In every image, I could see the pride and love I'd felt for this boy, who'd grown into a man I barely recognized. But people, I reminded myself, have the capacity to change. Sometimes, they need the right motivation to remember who they used to be. I opened my laptop and began researching real estate markets, property values, and investment opportunities in different cities. If Marcus thought I needed to consider my living situation, then perhaps it was time to do exactly that. The next morning brought another revelation. I discovered that Sophia had been opening my mail. A stack of letters sitting on the kitchen counter with obvious signs of having been steamed open and resealed. My bank statements, investment reports, and correspondence from Rebecca's office. All of it had been subjected to Sophia's inspection. "Oh, those came for you yesterday," Sophia said casually when she noticed me examining the tampered envelopes. "I put them there so you wouldn't miss them." The lies were becoming more blatant, more careless. Either Sophia truly believed I was too senile to notice her interference, or she simply didn't care anymore whether I caught her in her schemes. Both possibilities suggested that she felt increasingly confident in her position and my powerlessness to challenge it. "How thoughtful," I said, gathering the mail and tucking it under my arm. "I'll take these downstairs to review." "Actually, Betty, I was wondering if you might want to consider having your mail forwarded somewhere else. Marcus and I get so much correspondence for our business ventures, and I'd hate for anything important of yours to get lost in the shuffle." Business ventures. As far as I knew, Marcus worked for a software company, and Sophia didn't work at all. But apparently they were now entrepreneurs with substantial business correspondence requiring careful attention. "I'll certainly consider it," I said, though we both knew I had no intention of making their mail theft more convenient. In the basement, I opened each envelope carefully, documenting the evidence of tampering with photographs. The bank statements showed my account balances, information that Sophia had no business accessing. The investment reports detailed the performance of my retirement portfolio. Most interesting was a letter from Rebecca's office confirming our appointment and outlining the preliminary documents we'd discussed. That letter had been opened so hastily that it was barely resealed. Sophia had definitely read Rebecca's summary of my assets and the potential changes to my estate planning, which meant she now knew that I was worth considerably more than she'd assumed, and that I was actively working with an attorney to review my legal options. I wondered how long it would take for this information to filter back to Marcus, and what their response would be when they realized I wasn't quite as helpless as they'd believed. The answer came that afternoon when Marcus returned home early from work, something that rarely happened unless there was a crisis. I could hear him and Sophia talking urgently in the kitchen, their voices too low to make out specific words but high enough to convey agitation. 20 minutes later, Marcus knocked on my door again. "Mom, could you come upstairs for a minute? Sophia and I would like to talk to you about something." The formal tone sent warning bells through my mind, but I followed him upstairs to find Sophia sitting at the dining room table with a concerned expression that would have fooled anyone who didn't know her better. "Betty, please sit down," she said, gesturing to a chair across from her. "We're worried about you." I sat down carefully, keeping my expression neutral. "Worried about what? Marcus told me you've been meeting with lawyers, reviewing financial documents. That seems like a lot of stress for someone your age to be dealing with alone." "Someone my age." The phrase was carefully calculated to remind me of my supposed frailty and diminished capacity. "I'm perfectly capable of managing my own affairs," I said calmly. "Of course you are," Marcus jumped in quickly. "But Sophia and I were thinking, maybe it would be easier if we helped coordinate some of these things. I could review your finances, make sure everything's organized properly, and if you need legal advice, Sophia's father has an excellent attorney who specializes in elder law. Elder law. Because apparently at 62, I was now considered elderly and in need of specialized legal protection. From whom, I wondered, the general public or my own family? "That's very kind of you both," I said, "but I'm quite satisfied with my current legal representation." Sophia's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "We're just concerned that someone might try to take advantage of you. You know how these estate attorneys can be. They charge enormous fees and create problems where none exist, just to generate more business. Rebecca has been my attorney for 15 years. I trust her completely." "But Betty," Sophia leaned forward with an expression of exaggerated sympathy, "you have to understand that your judgment might not be as sharp as it used to be. That's completely normal at your age, nothing to be ashamed of. But it does mean you should rely on family to help protect your interests." The audacity was breathtaking. The woman who'd been intercepting my mail and discussing my death like a stock market investment was now positioning herself as my protector against financial exploitation. "My judgment is perfectly fine," I said, my voice gaining an edge that made both of them shift uncomfortably. "Sharp enough to recognize manipulation when I see it." "Mom," Marcus said quickly, "nobody's trying to manipulate anyone. We're family, we want what's best for you. And what exactly do you think is best for me?" Marcus and Sophia exchanged a look that spoke volumes about conversations they'd had without me. "We think," Sophia said carefully, "that you might be happier in a senior living community. Somewhere with people your own age, activities designed for your interests, medical care readily available. You wouldn't have to worry about maintaining a house, dealing with repairs, managing finances. Everything would be taken care of for you. A senior living community." They wanted to warehouse me in an institution where my presence wouldn't interfere with their enjoyment of my house and my inheritance. The suggestion was presented as concern for my well-being, but the underlying message was clear: remove yourself from our lives so we can proceed with our plans unimpeded. "That's an interesting suggestion," I said. "Have you researched any specific facilities?" "Actually, yes," Sophia said, pulling out a glossy brochure from a folder I hadn't noticed before. "Sunset Manor is supposed to be one of the finest facilities in the state. They have different levels of care available, from independent living to full assistance when that becomes necessary." I took the brochure and flipped through pages of smiling elderly residents engaged in craft projects and group exercises. The facility looked pleasant enough, but the monthly costs listed in fine print at the back made my eyes widen. "This is quite expensive," I observed. "That's not something you need to worry about," Marcus said quickly. "We'd handle all the financial arrangements. With my money, presumably." "Well, yes, but we'd manage everything for you. Make sure the bills are paid on time, handle any issues with the facility. You wouldn't have to deal with any of the stress." The picture was becoming clearer. Move me into an expensive facility, gain control of my finances to pay for it, and enjoy the house and remaining assets while I was safely tucked away where I couldn't interfere with their plans. It was an elegant solution from their perspective, I'd be cared for, they'd be free, and eventually nature would resolve the situation permanently in their favor. I appreciate you looking into this, I said, handing back the brochure, but I'm not ready to make that kind of change right now. Betty, Sophia's voice took on a harder edge, you have to be realistic about your limitations. This house is too much for you to handle. The stairs alone are dangerous for someone your age. What if you fell and hurt yourself? What if you had a medical emergency and no one was here to help? I've managed quite well for 62 years. I think I can handle a few more. That's exactly the kind of thinking that worries us, Marcus said. You're not seeing the risks clearly anymore. Not seeing clearly. Another suggestion that my mental faculties were declining, that I couldn't be trusted to make rational decisions about my own life. The campaign to have me declared incompetent was already beginning, disguised as loving concern from devoted family members. I stood up from the table, my decision crystallizing with perfect clarity. I think, I said calmly, that this conversation has been very enlightening. Thank you both for sharing your concerns so honestly. So you'll consider our suggestions? Sophia asked hopefully. Oh, I'll definitely be considering all of my options very carefully, I assured her. In fact, I plan to start making some changes immediately. That night, I called Rebecca at home. I've made my decision, I told her. I want to move forward with everything we discussed. How quickly can we proceed? How quickly do you want to proceed? I thought about Sophia's predatory smile, Marcus's willingness to ship me off to an institution, and the conversation I'd overheard about my timely demise. Tomorrow, I said. I want to start tomorrow. Rebecca was quiet for a moment. Betty, are you sure about this? Once we begin this process, there's no going back. I've never been more sure of anything in my life. All right then. I'll start making phone calls first thing in the morning. This is going to be interesting. Interesting was one word for it. I preferred to think of it as justice. As I lay in my basement bed that night, listening to Marcus and Sophia celebrating what they assumed was my capitulation to their plans, I smiled for the first time in months. They thought they'd won, that I'd meekly accept their vision of my future. They were about to learn otherwise. Tomorrow the real game would begin. The next morning arrived with the sound of Sophia's voice echoing through the house as she spoke on the phone with someone about interior design consultations. I could hear her describing my living room as hopelessly outdated, and my kitchen as desperately in need of modernization. She was already mentally redecorating before I'd even agreed to their senior living facility suggestion. I dressed carefully in my best navy blue suit, the one I used to wear to important business meetings when I was running my accounting firm. Today felt like it deserved that same level of professional armor. Rebecca had scheduled appointments throughout the morning, and I wanted to look like the competent businesswoman I'd always been, not the doddering elderly relative Sophia was trying to paint me as. By 8:30, I was in my car and heading downtown while Marcus and Sophia were still having their morning coffee in what used to be my breakfast nook. I'd left a note saying I had errands to run, deliberately vague about my actual destination and timeline. Let them wonder what I was up to. Rebecca's office building buzzed with the familiar energy of professionals starting their day. I felt a surge of nostalgia for my own working years, when I'd been part of this world of deadlines and decisions and meaningful work. Retirement had been supposed to be a reward for decades of hard work, not a prison sentence of irrelevance. You look like you mean business today, Rebecca observed as I settled into her office. She was already surrounded by legal documents and had clearly been working on my case since early morning. I feel like myself again for the first time in months, I admitted. What have you prepared? Rebecca spread several documents across her desk with the satisfaction of someone who enjoyed complex legal puzzles. I've been busy. First, let's talk about the house situation. Since your name is on the deed along with Marcus and Sophia's, you have equal ownership rights. That means you can't be evicted or forced to move without your consent. But they're making my life miserable enough that staying isn't really an option, which is exactly what they're counting on. However, there are other possibilities. As an equal owner, you have the right to force a sale of the property if the co-owners can't reach an agreement about its use. I leaned forward with interest. What would that involve? A partition action. Essentially, you'd petition the court to divide the property among the owners. Since a house can't be physically divided, the court would order it sold and the proceeds split equally among the three owners. So Marcus and Sophia would get their share of the money, but they'd lose the house itself. Exactly. And here's where it gets interesting. Given current market values, your house would likely sell for around $2.5 million. Split three ways, that's roughly $800,000 each. But Marcus and Sophia probably can't afford to buy out your share to keep the house. I did the mental math quickly. They'd need $1.6 million to purchase my 2/3 ownership. Right. And unless Marcus has been hiding a very successful side business, they don't have that kind of money readily available. So they'd be forced to sell. The implications were delicious. Sophia had been so focused on inheriting my house that she'd never considered the possibility that I might choose to liquidate it entirely. Her dream of living in my home rent-free while waiting for my death would evaporate along with the property itself. What about my other assets? I asked. Rebecca pulled out another folder. I've prepared several options for your estate planning. The simplest approach would be to change your will entirely, leaving everything to charities of your choice. But there are more creative possibilities if you want to make a statement. I'm listening. Option 1. Establish a scholarship fund at the local community college for students pursuing business degrees. The fund would be managed by a board of trustees, ensuring the money goes to people who actually need it, rather than spoiled children who expect inheritance without earning it. Option 2? A trust fund for Marcus, but with very specific conditions. He'd receive monthly payments only as long as he demonstrates certain behaviors. Treating you with respect, maintaining a relationship with you, making his own way financially rather than depending on inheritance. If he fails to meet the conditions, the money goes to charity instead. And option 3? Rebecca's smile turned slightly wicked. Leave everything to a foundation dedicated to supporting elderly people who've been financially abused by family members. Make it very clear in the will that this choice was motivated by your personal experience with such abuse. The poetic justice of that option appealed to me immensely. My money would help other people in situations similar to mine, while sending a very clear message about why Marcus and Sophia had been disinherited. How long would these changes take to implement? The will changes could be completed today if you're ready to sign. The house partition action would take longer, probably 3 to 6 months depending on how much Marcus and Sophia fight it. And they would fight it. Almost certainly, especially once they realize what losing the house means for their financial future. But fighting it would only delay the inevitable and cost them money in legal fees. I thought about Marcus's face when he'd suggested the senior living facility, the casual way he'd discussed managing my finances for me. He'd been so confident that I was too weak or confused to protect my own interests. Let's do it, I said. All of it. Change the will, file the partition action, and let's see how they respond when they realize I'm not as helpless as they assumed. Rebecca nodded approvingly. I'll need a few hours to finalize the paperwork. Can you come back this afternoon around 3 o'clock? Quote, I'll be here. I left Rebecca's office feeling lighter than I had in months. For the first time since Sophia had entered my life, I was taking action instead of simply reacting to her schemes. The knowledge that I had options, that I wasn't trapped in their vision of my future, restored a sense of power I'd forgotten I possessed. My next stop was the bank where I'd maintained accounts for over 20 years. Patricia Williams, the branch manager, greeted me warmly and ushered me into her private office when I explained that I needed to discuss some security concerns about my accounts. What kind of security issues are you worried about, Mrs. Davis? Patricia asked, her expression growing serious. Someone has been intercepting and opening my mail, including bank statements and financial documents. I'm concerned that my account information may have been compromised. Patricia's eyebrows rose sharply. That's identity theft, Mrs. Davis. Have you reported this to the police? Not yet, but I plan to. In the meantime, I'd like to change all my account numbers and set up additional security measures. Absolutely. We can issue new cards immediately and transfer all your funds to new account numbers by the end of business today. I'll also add verbal passwords to all your accounts. No one will be able to access any information without providing the correct password, even if they have your account numbers. We spent an hour updating my banking security and establishing new protocols. Patricia also suggested that I consider moving some of my assets to accounts at different institutions, just as an additional precaution. The idea made sense, especially since Sophia had demonstrated such interest in my financial situation. "Mrs. Davis," Patricia said as we concluded our business, "I hope you don't mind me saying this, but you seem upset about something beyond just the mail situation. Is everything all right at home?" Patricia had handled my banking for years and had always been more than just professionally courteous. Her concerns seemed genuine, and I found myself grateful for someone who cared enough to ask direct questions. "I'm having some family difficulties," I admitted. "Nothing I can't handle, but it's been stressful. Family money issues are always complicated. If you need any documentation of your account history or asset statements for legal purposes, just let me know. We can provide whatever you need." The offer was more helpful than Patricia probably realized. Having an independent financial institution document my assets and account activity could be useful if Marcus and Sophia tried to claim I was mentally incompetent or being influenced by outside parties. My final stop before lunch was the police station, where I filed a formal complaint about mail theft. Officer Jennifer Martinez took my statement and the evidence I'd photographed of the tampered envelopes. "Mail theft is a federal crime," she explained. "If you can prove who's been opening your mail, we can pursue charges. Do you have any idea who might be responsible?" "I have suspicions, but I'd prefer to gather more evidence before making accusations." Smart approach. In the meantime, you might want to consider getting a post office box for your important mail. That way you can control who has access to it. I thanked Officer Martinez and left the station with a case number and instructions for following up if the situation escalated. The paper trail was building nicely, documenting a pattern of financial interference that would be difficult for anyone to explain away as loving concern. Lunch was a quiet affair at a small cafe near Rebecca's office, where I could sit undisturbed and process the morning's activities. For months I'd felt like I was drowning in Sophia's manipulations and Marcus's indifference. Today I'd begun to swim back to the surface. My phone buzzed with a text message from Marcus. "Mom, where are you? Sophia made your favorite soup for lunch." The message felt like a peace offering, or perhaps a fishing expedition to gauge my mood after yesterday's conversation about senior living facilities. I typed back, "Thank you. That's sweet. I'm having lunch downtown. I'll be home later this afternoon." His response came quickly. "Everything okay? You've been out a lot lately." The irony wasn't lost on me. For months, they'd been making it clear that my presence in the house was unwelcome. Now that I was spending time away from home, they were suddenly interested in my whereabouts. "Everything's fine," I replied. "Just taking care of some business." At 3 o'clock sharp, I was back in Rebecca's office, reviewing the documents she'd prepared. The new will was comprehensive and airtight, leaving my entire estate to a foundation dedicated to elder abuse prevention. The petition for partition of the house was equally thorough, citing irreconcilable differences among the co-owners regarding the property's use. "Are you ready to sign these?" Rebecca asked, her pen poised over the signature pages. I thought about the conversation I'd overheard 2 nights ago, about Sophia's casual discussion of my death as a financial opportunity. I thought about Marcus's suggestion that I move to a senior facility so they could manage my finances. I thought about being relegated to the basement of my own home like an unwanted tenant. "I'm ready," I said, and signed my name with firm, decisive strokes. "The will goes into effect immediately," Rebecca explained as she notarized the documents. "I'll file the partition action first thing tomorrow morning. Marcus and Sophia will be served with papers within a few days." "How long before they realize what's happening?" "The partition notice will make it clear that you're forcing a sale of the house. The will changes won't be apparent unless they hire an attorney to challenge your mental competency, which might prompt them to investigate your recent legal activities." "Do you think they'll try to have me declared incompetent?" Rebecca considered the question carefully. "It's possible, especially if they realize how much money is at stake. But you've just demonstrated clear thinking and decision-making ability to multiple professional witnesses. Your banker, the police officer, myself, my staff. Any competency challenge would face significant evidence that you're mentally sharp and acting rationally. The drive home felt like traveling toward a battlefield where the opening shots were about to be fired. I'd spent the day loading my weapons and choosing my strategy. Now it was time to see how my opponents would respond. Marcus's car was in the driveway when I arrived, which was unusual for a weekday afternoon. Either he'd left work early, or he was working from home, possibly to keep an eye on my activities. The front door was unlocked, and I could hear voices from the kitchen as I entered. "There she is," Sophia called out cheerfully as I appeared in the doorway. "We were starting to worry about you. You've been gone all day." "I had several appointments to keep," I said, hanging my purse on the back of a chair. "Banking, legal matters, that sort of thing." Marcus looked up from his laptop with a frown. "Legal matters? I thought we agreed yesterday that I could help you with those things." "You made a suggestion. I didn't agree to anything." "Mom, we're just trying to help. Managing finances and legal issues can be overwhelming at any age." The patronizing tone was becoming more pronounced, as if they'd decided that treating me like a child would eventually convince me to accept childlike dependence on their judgment. "I've been managing my own affairs successfully for over 40 years, I reminded him. "I think I can handle a few more years of independence." Sophia and Marcus exchanged another one of their meaningful looks, the kind that suggested they'd been discussing my stubbornness and strategizing about how to overcome my resistance to their plans. "Betty," Sophia said in her most reasonable voice, "we're concerned that someone might be taking advantage of your situation. These lawyers and financial advisors, they see elderly clients as opportunities to generate fees. They might be encouraging you to make changes that aren't really in your best interest." Elderly clients. The language was deliberate, designed to reinforce their narrative that I was too old and vulnerable to make my own decisions. "My attorney has represented me for 15 years, I said calmly. "She's hardly a stranger looking to exploit me." "But people change," Marcus interjected. "Business pressures, financial motivations. Even longtime professionals can start putting their own interests ahead of their clients." The projection was remarkable. Marcus and Sophia, who were literally scheming to inherit my money and property, were warning me about professionals who might have financial motivations for their advice. "I appreciate your concern," I said, "but I'm confident in my choices." "What kind of choices?" Sophia asked, her tone sharpening slightly. "What exactly did you discuss with your lawyer today?" The question revealed more than she probably intended. They weren't just generally worried about my judgment. They were specifically concerned about what legal actions I might be taking that could affect their plans. "Estate planning matters," I said vaguely, "making sure everything is properly organized." "Estate planning?" Marcus's voice rose slightly. "What kind of estate planning?" "I mean, we've already discussed your will before." Everything was settled. Settled according to their preferences, he meant. They'd assumed that my previous will, which left everything to Marcus, would remain unchanged regardless of how they treated me. "Circumstances change," I said. "It's always wise to review these documents periodically." "What circumstances have changed?" Sophia demanded, dropping any pretense of casual interest. I looked at my son and his wife, these two people who'd spent months making me feel unwelcome in my own home, and decided it was time to give them something real to worry about. "Well," I said thoughtfully, "I've learned some interesting things about my living situation, about how certain people view my continued presence in this house, about what some people are hoping will happen to my assets in the near future." The color drained from Sophia's face so quickly that for a moment I thought she might faint. Marcus looked confused, but Sophia clearly understood the implications of my words. "I don't know what you think you heard," she began, but I cut her off with a raised hand. "I know exactly what I heard. The question is what I'm going to do about it." "Mom," Marcus said urgently, "if there's been some kind of misunderstanding—" "There's no misunderstanding. I heard your wife discussing my death as if it were an anticipated financial windfall. I've watched both of you treat me like an inconvenient obstacle to your inheritance rather than a human being deserving of respect. And I've decided that it's time to make some changes." Sophia's hands were visibly shaking now. "You can't just— I mean, whatever you think you know. I can't just— What? Change my will?" Decide who inherits my property? Make my own decisions about my own assets? I smiled pleasantly. Actually, I can do all of those things. In fact, I've spent today doing exactly that. The silence that followed was deafening. Marcus stared at me as if I'd suddenly started speaking a foreign language. Sophia looked like she was calculating numbers in her head, trying to figure out how much money had just slipped through her fingers. You changed your will? Marcus asked quietly. Among other things, yes. To what? That's between me and my attorney, but I will say this. Neither of you needs to worry about the burden of managing my estate anymore. I've made arrangements that will eliminate that responsibility entirely. Marcus slumped in his chair as the reality hit him. You disinherited me. I protected my assets from people who see them as an entitlement rather than a gift earned through relationship and respect. This is insane, Sophia exploded, her careful composure finally cracking. You can't just throw away your family because of some paranoid fantasy about what you think you heard. Paranoid fantasy? Would you like me to repeat the exact words you used when discussing my death and your inheritance plans? Sophia's mouth opened and closed several times before she managed to speak. Even if I said something thoughtless, that doesn't mean you should punish Marcus. He's your son. He deserves exactly what every child deserves from their parents: love, support, and the opportunity to build his own life. What he doesn't deserve is to inherit wealth that he's shown no appreciation for while treating the person who earned it with disrespect. Marcus finally found his voice. Mom, if we've done something to upset you, we can work it out. Family problems don't have to be solved with lawyers and legal documents. Family problems are solved through communication, compromise, and mutual respect. When those fail, legal documents become necessary to protect everyone's interests. Protect everyone's interests? Sophia's voice was climbing toward hysteria. You're destroying this family over a misunderstanding. I'm not destroying anything that wasn't already broken. I'm simply refusing to pretend that disrespect and manipulation are acceptable as long as they're dressed up as concern for my well-being. I stood up from the table, feeling strangely calm despite the emotional chaos I'd just unleashed. I'm going downstairs now. You two might want to discuss how you plan to support yourselves without the safety net of my inheritance. As I headed toward the basement stairs, I heard Sophia whisper urgently to Marcus. We have to do something. We can't just let her give everything away. Marcus's response was too quiet to hear, but his tone suggested that he was beginning to understand the magnitude of what had just happened. They'd gambled that I would passively accept their treatment, and they'd lost spectacularly. In my basement room, I sat on my bed and listened to the raised voices above my head. Sophia was crying now, alternating between anger and desperation, as she realized that her comfortable future had just evaporated. Marcus sounded shell-shocked, asking questions that Sophia couldn't answer about legal options and family reconciliation. My phone rang around 8 o'clock. Rebecca's name appeared on the screen. How did it go? She asked without preamble. About as well as expected. They're upstairs having what sounds like a complete meltdown. Any threats? Accusations of mental incompetence? Demands to see the documents? Not yet, but I suspect those are coming. Sophia seems to be cycling through the stages of grief at remarkable speed. Well, brace yourself. Tomorrow I'm filing the partition action, which means they'll be officially served with papers demanding the sale of the house. That's going to escalate things considerably. I'm ready for whatever comes next. Good. And Betty? You did the right thing today. No one should have to tolerate being treated like a burden in their own home. After Rebecca hung up, I opened my laptop and began researching apartments in different parts of the city. If the house was going to be sold anyway, I'd need somewhere to live during the transition. The thought of having my own space again, somewhere that Sophia couldn't redecorate or control, filled me with anticipation rather than dread. The voices upstairs had quieted to urgent whispers, punctuated by occasional outbursts from Sophia that suggested she was still struggling to accept the new reality. I wondered if they were already consulting lawyers of their own, looking for ways to challenge my decisions or have me declared incompetent. Let them try. I'd spent one day reclaiming my power, and I had no intention of giving it up again. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight I went to sleep feeling like myself for the first time in months. The woman who'd built a successful business, raised a son as a single mother, and survived every challenge life had thrown at her was still here. She'd just been buried under months of manipulation and disrespect, but she was awake now, and she had work to do. The next morning brought an unexpected development. I woke to the sound of Marcus's voice on the phone in the kitchen, above me, speaking in hushed tones to someone he addressed as Dad. My ex-husband Richard had been absent from our lives for over 20 years, but apparently desperate times called for reaching out to long-abandoned family connections. She's lost her mind completely, Marcus was saying. Changed her will, talking about selling the house. Sophia thinks maybe you could talk some sense into her. You know, man to man, about what's best for the family. I almost laughed out loud. Richard had walked out on us when Marcus was 15, claiming he needed to find himself somewhere that didn't include child support payments or parental responsibilities. The idea that he would suddenly emerge as the voice of family wisdom was both pathetic and predictable. By the time I made my way upstairs for coffee, Marcus had finished his phone call but remained sitting at the kitchen table with an expression of grim determination. Sophia was notably absent, probably still in bed recovering from yesterday's emotional breakdown. "Good morning," I said pleasantly, moving past him to the coffee maker. "Mom, I called Dad last night. I heard, how is Richard these days? He's doing well, living in Arizona, remarried. He was shocked to hear about what's happening with the family." The family. As if Richard had any claim to being part of our family after 2 decades of voluntary absence, but I recognized the strategy Marcus was employing. He was assembling what he imagined would be a coalition of male authority figures to override my decisions. "I'm sure he was very concerned," I said dryly. "He's flying in this weekend. He wants to meet with you, talk through this situation before you do something irreversible." "The changes I've made are already irreversible, Marcus, but I'm always happy to see old friends." Marcus's jaw tightened. "He's not an old friend, Mom. He's my father, and he has rights in this situation too." "What rights would those be?" "The right to an opinion about assets he never contributed to? The right to interfere in decisions affecting property he never helped purchase? I'm curious about the legal basis for his involvement. It's not about legal rights. It's about family. Richard forfeited his family rights when he abandoned his family. But if he wants to visit, that's fine with me. I'm sure Sophia will enjoy meeting her father-in-law for the first time." The barb hit its mark. Marcus flushed, realizing that his father's absence during all the important moments of his adult life made this sudden intervention appear exactly as calculated as it was. My phone buzzed with a text from Rebecca. "Papers filed. Process server will deliver to the house this afternoon. Are you prepared for their reaction?" I typed back quickly, "Ready as I'll ever be." "What was that?" Marcus asked, noting my attention to the phone. "Just a friend confirming lunch plans." "Mom, about yesterday. I think maybe we all said some things in the heat of the moment that we didn't really mean. Maybe we should start over, have a calm conversation about what's really best for everyone." The attempted reset was transparent, but I appreciated the glimpse into their revised strategy. Having failed with intimidation and manipulation, they were now trying reconciliation and negotiation. "I'm always willing to have honest conversations," I said, "but I should warn you that honesty works both ways. If you want to discuss what's really best for everyone, that conversation would have to include some uncomfortable truths about how I've been treated in this house. We never meant to make you feel unwelcome. If there were misunderstandings about living arrangements or household decisions, those things can be fixed." Misunderstandings. As if being forced into the basement and having my mail stolen were simple communication errors rather than deliberate attempts to marginalize and control me. "Can they be fixed, Marcus? Can you unring the bell of your wife discussing my death as a financial opportunity? Can you undo months of treating me like an inconvenient burden rather than your mother?" People say things when they're frustrated that they don't really mean. Sophia's been under a lot of stress with the wedding, adjusting to married life, trying to fit in with a new family. And I've been under the stress of being systematically pushed out of my own home by someone who sees me as an obstacle to her inheritance. But somehow my stress doesn't seem to warrant the same understanding. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, staring into his coffee cup as if it might contain answers to questions he didn't want to ask. "What would it take?" he said finally. "What would it take for you to reconsider the will changes?" There it was, the negotiation phase of their strategy. They'd realized that emotional manipulation and family pressure weren't working, so now they were ready to discuss terms for restoring their inheritance prospects. "It would take a fundamental change in how this household operates," I said, "starting with an acknowledgement that this is my house, purchased with my money, and that I have the right to live here with dignity and respect. Of course it's your house. We've never disputed that. Haven't you? When Sophia redecorates without consulting me? When you discuss moving me to a senior facility so you can manage my finances? When I'm relegated to the basement, like an unwanted tenant? Those things can change." Sophia was just trying to help modernize things, and the basement arrangement was temporary until we figured out a better solution. The better solution, according to yesterday's conversation, was shipping me off to Sunset Manor so you could have the house to yourselves. That was never a firm decision. We were just exploring options. I studied my son's face, looking for traces of the boy I'd raised with such hope and love. He was trying to find a path back to his inheritance, without admitting the fundamental disrespect that had created this situation. But some acknowledgments, once made, couldn't be taken back. "Marcus," I said gently, "I need you to understand something. The problem isn't just Sophia's behavior or even your willingness to go along with it. The problem is that you've both revealed how you really see me. Not as your mother or as a person deserving of respect, but as an asset to be managed until it can be inherited. That's not true, isn't it? When was the last time you asked about my day? When did you last show interest in my thoughts or feelings about anything that didn't relate to your convenience? When did you last treat me like a person rather than a problem to be solved?" Marcus opened his mouth to respond, then closed it again. The silence stretched between us, filled with the weight of questions he couldn't answer. The doorbell rang at exactly 2:00, interrupting our increasingly uncomfortable conversation. Through the window, I could see a woman in a business suit holding an official-looking envelope. "I'll get it," I said, rising from my chair. "Mrs. Davis?" the woman asked when I opened the door. "Yes. I have legal documents for Marcus Davis and Sophia Davis. Are they available to receive service?" "Marcus is here. Sophia is upstairs. Would you like me to get her?" "If you could, please. I need to serve them both personally." I called upstairs for Sophia, who appeared a few minutes later looking disheveled and confused. She'd clearly been crying again, her eyes red-rimmed and her usually perfect makeup absent. "Marcus Davis?" the process server asked. "Yes," he replied, his voice tight with apprehension. "Sophia Davis?" "Yes," Sophia whispered. "You're both being served with a petition for partition of real property located at..." The woman recited our address and handed each of them a thick envelope. "You have 30 days to respond. Have a good day." After she left, Marcus and Sophia stood in the hallway holding their envelopes like they contained explosive devices. I could see the fear in their faces as they realized that yesterday's threats had become today's legal reality. "What is this?" Sophia asked, though her tone suggested she already knew. "It's a petition to force the sale of the house," I explained helpfully. "Since we can't agree on how the property should be used, the court will resolve the matter by ordering it sold and dividing the proceeds among the owners." "You can't do this," Sophia said, her voice rising. "This is our home." "It's my home, too. And since I'm not welcome here as a resident, I've decided to exercise my option as an owner." Marcus was scanning the legal documents with growing alarm. "Mom, this says the house could be sold within 6 months. That's the typical timeline, yes. Of course, you could avoid the sale by purchasing my ownership share, but that would require..." I pretended to calculate, roughly $1.6 million. The number hung in the air like a death sentence. Both Marcus and Sophia knew they didn't have access to that kind of money. Marcus's software engineering salary was comfortable but not wealthy, and Sophia had never worked a day in her life. "We could get a loan," Marcus said desperately. "Use the house as collateral. You could try, but banks typically require borrowers to demonstrate ability to repay. Your combined income might not qualify you for a loan of that size. This is insane, Sophia exploded. You're destroying your own family over hurt feelings. I'm protecting my assets from people who've demonstrated that they see me as an obstacle to their financial goals, rather than a family member deserving of respect. We never said you were an obstacle. I raised an eyebrow. Would you like me to quote your exact words from 2 nights ago? Sophia's face went pale again. She'd clearly hoped that conversation would remain buried, a private moment of honesty that could be denied if necessary. Even if I said something I didn't mean when I was frustrated, that doesn't justify this nuclear option, she said, gesturing at the legal papers. What would justify it in your opinion? How badly would I need to be treated before I'd be allowed to protect myself? You're not protecting yourself, Marcus interjected. You're punishing us. I'm making decisions about my own property and assets. If those decisions feel like punishment, perhaps that says something about your expectations. The afternoon dissolved into a series of increasingly desperate negotiations. Marcus and Sophia took turns trying different approaches: emotional appeals, promises of changed behavior, suggestions for compromise arrangements. Each proposal, however, was built on the assumption that I would eventually back down if they found the right combination of words. They didn't understand that my decision wasn't emotional or reactionary. It was a calculated business decision based on a clear assessment of how they viewed our relationship. They'd shown me who they really were, and I'd responded accordingly. By evening, they'd moved into the anger phase of their grief process. The whispered conversations had become heated arguments, with each of them blaming the other for the catastrophe that had befallen their inheritance prospects. "This is your fault," I heard Marcus tell Sophia through the thin walls. "If you hadn't been so obvious about wanting her out of the house, none of this would have happened." "My fault? You're the one who suggested the senior living facility. You're the one who wanted to manage her finances." "I was trying to find a solution that worked for everyone. You were the one talking about her death like it was a business opportunity." "I never said I wanted her to die. I just said that eventually the house would be ours, which is normal for children to inherit from their parents." "Well, apparently not anymore. Thanks to your big mouth, we're about to lose everything." The blame game continued late into the night, each of them trying to rewrite history to make the other responsible for their current predicament. Neither seemed willing to acknowledge that their fundamental attitude toward me had been the real problem, not just their careless words. My phone rang around 11 o'clock. Rebecca's name appeared on the screen. "How are they handling the service of papers?" she asked. "About as well as expected. Lots of anger, blame, and desperate attempts at negotiation. Any threats? Any suggestions that you're not mentally competent?" "Not yet, but Marcus called his father. Richard is apparently flying in this weekend to add his voice to their cause." Rebecca snorted. "The father who abandoned the family 20 years ago?" "The very same. Apparently desperate times call for recruiting absent fathers as voices of authority." "That's actually good news for us. Nothing undermines their credibility like bringing in someone who's been completely uninvolved in your life for decades. It makes their concern look manufactured rather than genuine. There's something else. They keep focusing on negotiating terms for me to change my will back. They don't seem to understand that this isn't a business transaction. That's telling. It shows they still see you primarily as a source of assets rather than a person with legitimate grievances. That attitude will serve us well if this goes to court." "Do you think it will go to court?" "The partition action definitely will, unless they can come up with the money to buy you out. As for challenging your mental competency or the will changes, that depends on how desperate they get. I'm prepared for whatever comes next." "Good. Oh, and Betty? You might want to start looking at apartments or rental properties. Even if they don't contest the partition, the house sale process will take several months, and living there during that time could become very unpleasant." After hanging up, I opened my laptop and resumed researching housing options. The idea of having my own space again, somewhere that reflected my taste rather than Sophia's vision of modern elegance, was becoming more appealing by the hour. I found several promising apartments in neighborhoods I'd always liked but never considered when I was focused on maintaining the family home. Downtown lofts with exposed brick walls and large windows. garden apartments near the university with built-in bookshelves and cozy reading nooks, senior-friendly communities that offered independence with optional support services. For the first time in months, I was planning a future that excited rather than depressed me. A future where I could decorate according to my own preferences, cook meals without criticism, and live without constantly measuring my words and actions against someone else's convenience. The voices upstairs had finally quieted, but I could hear Sophia crying softly in what used to be my bedroom. Part of me felt sorry for her. She was young and had probably never faced real consequences for her actions before. The entitled behavior that had driven me to this point was likely learned rather than inherent. But sympathy didn't change the fundamental reality of our situation. She'd viewed me as an obstacle to be removed, rather than a person to be respected. And that revelation couldn't be taken back or explained away. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Betty, this is Richard. Marcus gave me your number. I'll be in town Saturday and would like to take you to dinner. We need to discuss this family situation before it gets completely out of hand." The presumption was remarkable. After 20 years of absence, Richard apparently felt qualified to judge my decisions and mediate family disputes. The message contained no acknowledgement of his abandonment, no expression of regret for his absence during the difficult years of single parenthood, no recognition that his opinion carried less weight than a stranger's. I typed back, "Richard, how nice to hear from you after all these years. I'd be happy to have dinner and catch up on old times. I'm curious to hear about your thoughts on family responsibility and loyalty." His response came quickly. "Saturday at 7? Luigi's downtown? Perfect. See you then." I looked forward to that conversation. Richard had always been someone who believed his opinions should carry weight, regardless of his actual contributions or commitments. Meeting with him would give me an opportunity to demonstrate exactly how little influence absent fathers wielded over women who'd learned to make their own decisions. The next few days passed in a blur of research and preparation. I visited several apartments, met with a real estate agent about the upcoming house sale, and consulted with Rebecca about strategies for handling Richard's intervention attempt. The key, Rebecca advised, is to remain calm and factual. Don't let him provoke you into emotional responses that he can use to question your judgment. Stick to the facts. You've been disrespected in your own home. Your daughter-in-law discussed your death as a financial opportunity, and your son suggested institutionalizing you so they could manage your finances. And if he suggests I'm overreacting, point out that you're making rational business decisions about your own assets. Ask him to explain why Marcus and Sophia are entitled to inherit wealth they've shown no appreciation for, while treating the person who earned it with disrespect. Friday evening brought another surprise. I was reading in my basement room when I heard the front door open and unfamiliar voices in the hallway. Sophia was greeting someone with unusual enthusiasm, her voice bright and artificial in a way that suggested she was performing for an audience. "She's downstairs," I heard her say. "Marcus is right. She's been acting very strangely lately. We're worried about her mental state." The response came in a woman's voice I didn't recognize. "Has she seen a doctor recently?" Sometimes changes in behavior can indicate underlying medical issues. Medical issues. They were building a case for incompetency, recruiting what sounded like a healthcare professional to provide credibility for their concerns about my mental state. I climbed the basement stairs quietly, stopping just short of the kitchen doorway where I could listen without being seen. "She's always been sharp as a tack," Marcus was saying, "but lately she's been paranoid, making accusations, talking about family members trying to harm her. It's not like her at all." "And the legal changes?" the unknown woman asked. "Completely irrational," Sophia replied. "She's talking about giving away everything to charity, forcing us to sell the house. We think someone might be influencing her, taking advantage of her confusion." "Dr. Patterson," Marcus said, and I recognized the name of his family physician. "Is there anything we can do legally to protect her from making decisions that aren't in her best interest?" Dr. Patterson. Marcus had called in his own doctor to provide medical credibility for their competency challenge. The woman had never examined me, barely knew me beyond my brief interactions during Marcus's childhood medical appointments, but she was apparently willing to discuss my mental state based on secondhand reports from interested parties. Without examining her directly, I can't make any clinical assessments, Dr. Patterson said carefully. But if you're genuinely concerned about cognitive decline or outside influence, there are legal options. A competency evaluation, guardianship proceedings. These things require court involvement, but they can protect elderly individuals from exploitation. Elderly individuals. Exploitation. The language was carefully chosen to paint me as a vulnerable victim, rather than a competent woman making informed decisions about manipulative family members. I'd heard enough. I walked into the kitchen with a bright smile, catching all three of them off guard. Dr. Patterson, what a lovely surprise. I didn't know you were visiting. The doctor looked embarrassed at being caught discussing my mental state in my own kitchen. Mrs. Davis, Marcus and Sophia asked me to stop by because they're concerned about some recent changes in your behavior. How thoughtful of them to arrange a house call. I assume you'll want to examine me before making any medical recommendations? Well, I was just providing general information about options for families dealing with elderly care issues. I see. And what specific elderly care issues do you believe I'm experiencing? Dr. Patterson glanced at Marcus and Sophia, clearly looking for guidance about how to handle my direct questions. They've mentioned some concerns about decision-making, possible confusion or outside influence affecting your judgment. Interesting. Have they also mentioned that they've been intercepting my mail, discussing my death as a financial opportunity, and suggesting I move to a senior facility so they can manage my finances? Mrs. Davis, Sophia interrupted, you're mischaracterizing our conversations again. Dr. Patterson, this is exactly what we're talking about. She's become paranoid, imagining conspiracies where none exist. Paranoid? I turned to Dr. Patterson with raised eyebrows. Doctor, if you discovered that family members were opening your mail without permission, would you consider it paranoid to be concerned about that behavior? Mail theft is certainly a legitimate concern, Dr. Patterson admitted. And if you overheard those same family members discussing your death as an anticipated financial windfall, would you consider it paranoid to question their motives? That would be disturbing. And if those family members suggested institutionalizing you so they could control your finances, would you consider it paranoid to seek legal protection? Dr. Patterson was beginning to look uncomfortable with the direction of our conversation. Mrs. Davis, without knowing the specific context of these situations. The specific context is that I've discovered my son and daughter-in-law view me as an obstacle to their inheritance, rather than a family member deserving of respect. In response, I've made rational decisions to protect my assets and my living situation. Marcus and Sophia are now trying to have me declared incompetent because my decisions don't align with their financial interests. The room fell silent. Dr. Patterson looked from me to Marcus to Sophia, clearly reassessing the situation she'd walked into. Dr. Patterson, I continued, as a medical professional, do you think it's appropriate to discuss a patient's mental competency based solely on reports from financially interested parties, without conducting an actual examination or reviewing medical records? No, she said quietly. That wouldn't be appropriate. Then perhaps you'd like to schedule a proper appointment at your office, where you can conduct a thorough evaluation of my cognitive function and mental state? That would be the proper procedure, yes. Excellent. I'll call Monday to set up an appointment. I'm quite confident that a professional evaluation will demonstrate that my recent decisions have been rational responses to legitimate concerns rather than symptoms of cognitive decline. Dr. Patterson gathered her purse with obvious discomfort. I should go. This seems like a family matter that doesn't require medical intervention at this point. After she left, Marcus and Sophia stood in the kitchen looking like children who'd been caught cheating on a test. Their attempt to recruit medical authority for their competency challenge had backfired spectacularly. Well, I said pleasantly, that was enlightening. Anything else you'd like to discuss before I go back downstairs? Neither of them responded. They'd shown their hand too early, revealing the extent of their desperation and the tactics they were willing to employ. But they'd also demonstrated that their case for my incompetency was weak enough that even a friendly physician wouldn't support it without proper evaluation. Tomorrow would bring Richard's arrival and another attempt to pressure me into changing my decisions. But tonight I went to bed feeling confident that I was several steps ahead of their increasingly frantic schemes. The game was far from over, but I was definitely winning. Saturday evening arrived with an unexpected phone call from Marcus, informing me that Richard had landed early and would be joining us for dinner at the house instead of meeting me at the restaurant. The change of venue wasn't accidental. They wanted home field advantage for what they clearly saw as a crucial intervention. I dressed carefully in a burgundy silk blouse and tailored black slacks, the kind of outfit I used to wear to important business meetings. If Richard thought he could intimidate me with paternal authority after 2 decades of absence, he was about to learn otherwise. The doorbell rang precisely at 6 o'clock. Through the window, I could see a man who bore only a passing resemblance to the husband I'd once known. Richard had gained considerable weight, his hairline had receded dramatically, and his clothes suggested either financial struggles or a complete lack of interest in personal appearance. Time, it seemed, had not been kind to him. Marcus opened the door with an enthusiasm I hadn't seen him display in months. "Dad, great to see you. Come in, come in." "Marcus, my boy," Richard boomed in the artificially hearty voice I remembered from his salesmanship days. "Good to see you. And you must be Sophia." Sophia practically glowed under Richard's attention, transforming into the charming young woman she could be when it served her purposes. "Mr. Davis, it's wonderful to finally meet you. Marcus has told me so much about you." The lie was so smooth I almost admired her delivery. Marcus had barely mentioned his father in the years since their last contact, and when he did, it was usually with bitterness or disappointment. "And there's my beautiful ex-wife," Richard said, turning his attention to me with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Betty, you look wonderful. The years have been good to you." "Richard, you look." I paused, letting him wonder what assessment I might make, exactly like someone who's been living in Arizona. His smile faltered slightly, but he recovered quickly. "Desert life agrees with me. Sun, golf, no stress. You should visit sometime. How generous of you to extend the invitation." Sophia had prepared an elaborate dinner, clearly hoping to impress Richard with her domestic skills. The dining room table was set with my good china and crystal, items I hadn't seen since they'd been relegated to storage when Sophia redecorated. Candles flickered romantically, and soft music played in the background. It was the kind of scene designed to create an atmosphere of family harmony and sophisticated living. "This is beautiful, Sophia," Richard gushed as we sat down to dinner. "Marcus is a lucky man to have found such a talented wife." "Thank you, Mr. Davis. I just want our home to be a place where family feels welcome and appreciated." Our home. The possessive pronoun wasn't lost on me, nor was the implication that I was somehow failing to appreciate the welcoming atmosphere Sophia had created. The conversation during dinner carefully avoided the elephant in the room, focusing instead on Richard's life in Arizona, his new wife Janet, and his work in real estate development. He painted a picture of success and contentment that sounded rehearsed and probably embellished. "Janet and I have a beautiful home in Scottsdale," he said, cutting into his steak. 4 bedrooms, pool, mountain views. We love entertaining. You'd be amazed how many business deals get done around a barbecue grill." "How nice for you," I said. "It sounds like you've built a wonderful life for yourself." "I have, and that's actually part of why I wanted to see you, Betty. I've learned some things about success and family over the years. Sometimes we have to make hard decisions, but we should always think about what's best for the people we love." There it was. The opening gambit of what I was sure would be a carefully orchestrated attempt to convince me that my recent decisions were selfish and destructive to family harmony. "What kinds of hard decisions?" I asked innocently. "Well, for instance, when Janet's mother started having memory issues, we had to make the difficult choice to move her into assisted living. She fought us at first, insisted she was fine living alone, but we knew it was dangerous for her to continue that way. The parallel was hardly subtle. Richard was comparing me to an elderly woman with memory issues who needed to be overruled for her own safety. "How sad for her," I said. "I imagine it's difficult to have your autonomy taken away by people who claim to know what's best for you." Sometimes love means making unpopular decisions, Sophia interjected, even when the person you're trying to help doesn't understand why it's necessary. Exactly, Richard agreed. And Marcus tells me you've been making some pretty dramatic changes lately. New will, talk about selling the house. That doesn't sound like the practical Betty I used to know. Perhaps you didn't know me as well as you thought. After all, the practical Betty you knew managed to raise our son alone, build a successful business, and purchase this house without any assistance from absent family members. Richard's jaw tightened. I contributed to Marcus's upbringing. When? Before you left when he was 15, or during the 20 years since then, when you've been playing golf in Arizona? I sent money, he said defensively. You sent sporadic child support payments when the state forced you to. That's hardly the same thing as contributing to his upbringing. Marcus shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Mom, Dad's here now. Can't we focus on moving forward instead of relitigating the past? Of course we can, I agreed. Let's talk about the present. Richard, what exactly brings you to town after all these years? Sudden concern for family welfare, or something more specific? Richard exchanged a look with Marcus and Sophia that confirmed my suspicions about the coordinated nature of this intervention. I'm concerned about the family being torn apart by misunderstandings, he said carefully. Marcus tells me you feel like Sophia, and he don't appreciate you, but from what I can see, they're just trying to help you transition into a more comfortable lifestyle. Transition into a more comfortable lifestyle. What an interesting way to describe being forced into the basement of my own home. Now, Betty, that's not fair, Sophia protested. We explained that the basement arrangement was temporary, just until we could figure out a better solution for everyone. The better solution being Sunset Manor, where I'd be out of your way entirely while you enjoyed my house and waited for my death to finalize your inheritance. Richard leaned forward with an expression of concerned authority. Betty, I think you're reading malicious intent into conversations that were probably just practical planning. Young couples need to think about their future, and that includes considering how to care for aging parents. Aging parents, I repeated. Tell me, Richard, at what age did you start considering yourself aging? When did you begin making decisions based on the assumption that your judgment was no longer reliable? That's different. I'm still active, still working, still independent. I see. And what makes you different from me? I'm only 3 years older than you. I'm in excellent health. And until recently, I was living independently in my own home that I've owned for over 30 years. Richard was quiet for a moment, clearly realizing that his argument about aging and independence applied equally to both of us. The difference, Marcus said, jumping in to help his father, is that Dad isn't making irrational decisions that could hurt his family's future. Irrational decisions. Such as giving away your entire estate to charity instead of leaving it to your son. Ah, there it is. The real issue isn't my age or my judgment. It's that I'm not planning to leave my money to people who've demonstrated that they see me as an obstacle to their inheritance, rather than a family member deserving of respect. We don't see you as an obstacle, Sophia said, but her voice lacked conviction. Don't you? Would you like me to repeat the exact words you used when discussing my death and your subsequent inheritance of this house? Sophia's face flushed red. I was just talking hypothetically about the future. Everyone knows that children typically inherit from their parents eventually. Eventually. But you seemed particularly eager for that inheritance to come sooner rather than later. Richard cleared his throat, trying to regain control of the conversation. Betty, even if there were some thoughtless comments made in private, that doesn't justify destroying the family's financial security out of spite. I'm not destroying anything out of spite. I'm making rational decisions about my assets based on how I've been treated by the people who expect to inherit them. But think about Marcus's future, Richard pleaded. Think about the grandchildren you might have someday. Do you really want to leave them with nothing because of a temporary family conflict? I'm thinking about the example I want to set for any future grandchildren. I want them to understand that respect and love can't be taken for granted, that treating elderly family members poorly has consequences, and that inheritance is a gift to be earned through relationship, not an entitlement to be claimed through genetics. The table fell silent. Richard, Marcus and Sophia all looked like they'd been expecting a different conversation, one where emotional appeals and family guilt would override my logical assessment of the situation. Besides, I continued, I'm curious about your sudden interest in Marcus's financial security, Richard. For 20 years, you've shown no concern about his well-being or future. What's changed? Richard's discomfort was obvious. I've always cared about Marcus. Just because I wasn't physically present doesn't mean I stopped being his father. Actually, that's exactly what it means. Fatherhood is about presence, support, guidance, and sacrifice. It's not a biological accident that gives you permanent authority regardless of your actions. I made mistakes, he admitted grudgingly, but that doesn't mean I don't have a right to be concerned about what's happening to this family now. What's happening to this family now is that the person who actually raised Marcus and sacrificed for his well-being is being asked to tolerate disrespect and manipulation in order to preserve the inheritance expectations of people who've shown no appreciation for those sacrifices. Marcus finally spoke up, his voice strained. Mom, we do appreciate everything you've done for us. If we've made you feel unappreciated, we can work on that. But destroying the family's financial future isn't the solution. What would be the solution in your opinion? We could go back to how things were before. You could move back upstairs. We could include you in household decisions. And we could all live together as a family. And my will? Marcus hesitated. Maybe you could consider a compromise. Leave some money to charity if that's important to you, but also provide for your family. How much of a compromise are we talking about? Half to charity, half to you, a quarter to charity? What percentage of my life's work are you willing to let me give away before you consider it unreasonable? I don't know. That's something we could discuss. But the fundamental assumption is that you're entitled to inherit my wealth regardless of how you treat me. The only question is how much of it I'm allowed to redirect based on my own values and experiences. It's not about entitlement, Sophia protested. It's about family. Parents leave things to their children because they love them. And children show love and respect to their parents because they appreciate them. When that equation becomes one-sided, the relationship needs to be reevaluated. Richard leaned back in his chair, clearly frustrated that his intervention wasn't going according to plan. Betty, I think you're being stubborn and unrealistic. Family relationships aren't business transactions where everything has to be perfectly balanced. You're right, Richard. Family relationships should be based on love, respect, and mutual care. Business transactions are what happen when those foundations are absent. So what's it going to take? He demanded. What do Marcus and Sophia have to do to convince you to reconsider these decisions? They'd have to convince me that they see me as a person rather than an asset. They'd have to demonstrate genuine remorse for their behavior and make meaningful changes in how they treat me. And they'd have to understand that inheritance is a privilege to be earned, not a right to be claimed. That's impossible, Sophia burst out. You're asking us to prove feelings that we can't demonstrate to your satisfaction. No matter what we do, you'll find fault with it because you've already decided we're terrible people. Have I? When have I asked you to prove anything? All I've done is respond to behavior I observed and conversations I overheard. You're the ones who revealed your true attitudes toward me. We were just being realistic about the future, Marcus said desperately. Every family has to think about these things eventually. There's a difference between thinking about the future and planning for someone's death as if it were a business opportunity. There's a difference between practical planning and treating a living person like an inconvenient obstacle to your inheritance. The dinner conversation continued for another hour, with Richard, Marcus, and Sophia taking turns trying different approaches to convince me to reverse my decisions. They appealed to family loyalty, future generations, and the importance of forgiveness. They suggested therapy, mediation, and cooling-off periods. But beneath every argument was the same fundamental assumption: that my money should go to Marcus regardless of how I was treated, and that any decision to redirect it was inherently selfish and vindictive. Finally, Richard played what he clearly thought was his strongest card. Betty, he said, leaning forward with an expression of paternal concern, I think you need to consider the possibility that you're not thinking clearly about this situation. Grief, loneliness, and aging can all affect judgment in ways we don't always recognize. Grief about what? About Marcus growing up and starting his own family. About feeling less central to his life than you used to be. It's natural for parents to struggle with those transitions. The condescension was breathtaking. Richard, who had abandoned his own family rather than navigate the challenges of parenthood, was now lecturing me about the psychological difficulties of watching children become independent. "Richard," I said calmly, "I celebrated Marcus's independence. I encouraged him to build his own life, pursue his own dreams, and make his own choices. What I didn't expect was for him to choose disrespect and manipulation as the foundation of his relationship with me. But sometimes what feels like disrespect is just the natural friction that comes from multiple adults living in the same household," Sophia said. "Maybe if we all tried harder to be understanding." "Understanding goes both ways," I interrupted. "I've been understanding about having my bedroom taken away. I've been understanding about being excluded from household decisions in my own home. I've been understanding about having my mail intercepted and my living arrangements dictated to me. At some point, understanding becomes enabling. So what now?" Marcus asked, his voice hollow with defeat. "You're just going to go through with all of this? Force the sale of the house? Give away everything to charity? And cut us out of your life completely?" "I'm going to continue making decisions based on how I'm treated and what I observe about people's character. If those decisions result in consequences you don't like, perhaps that should motivate you to examine your own behavior." Richard stood up abruptly, his face red with frustration. "This is ridiculous. You're destroying this family because your feelings got hurt. That's not strength, Betty. That's petty vindictiveness. And what would you call abandoning your wife and teenage son because domestic responsibilities interfered with your personal fulfillment? Strength. Maturity? Parental dedication? That was different. That was 20 years ago. Yes, it was. And for 20 years, Marcus and I managed quite well without your input or authority. I'm not sure what makes you think your opinion carries weight in this situation." Richard grabbed his jacket from the back of his chair. "I can see I'm wasting my time here. You've made up your mind to be the victim in this situation, and nothing anyone says is going to change that. You're right that nothing you say is going to change my mind. But I was never the victim in this situation. Victims don't have options. I have plenty of options, and I'm exercising them." After Richard left, promising to keep in touch with Marcus and offering to help in any way he could, the house felt strangely quiet. Marcus and Sophia sat at the dining room table, surrounded by the remnants of their carefully planned intervention dinner, looking shell-shocked by its complete failure. "Well," I said pleasantly, "that was an interesting evening. Thank you for dinner, Sophia. It was delicious." "Where do we go from here?" Marcus asked quietly. "I suppose that depends on what you want to happen next. You have about 5 months before the court orders the house to be sold. You can spend that time accepting the new reality and planning your next steps, or you can spend it fighting battles you can't win. And there's nothing we can do to change your mind about the will? There's always something that can be done to repair relationships, Marcus. But it would require acknowledging that the problem isn't my hurt feelings or my stubborn vindictiveness. It would require understanding that respect and appreciation can't be demanded or negotiated. They have to be demonstrated through consistent behavior over time." "How much time?" Sophia asked. "I don't know. But I can tell you that as long as you see this as a temporary inconvenience that you need to endure until I return your inheritance, you're missing the point entirely." I left them sitting at the table and retreated to my basement room, feeling oddly energized by the evening's confrontation. Richard's intervention had backfired spectacularly, revealing the weakness of their position rather than strengthening it. His obvious discomfort with being called out for his own parental failures had undermined any authority he might have claimed. More importantly, the evening had clarified the fundamental disconnect between my perspective and theirs. They saw my decisions as emotional overreactions that could be corrected through the right combination of pressure and persuasion. I saw them as rational responses to behavioral patterns that revealed character flaws, requiring genuine change. My phone buzzed with a text message from Rebecca. "How did dinner with the ex go?" I typed back, "About as well as expected." He tried to play the concerned father card after 20 years of absence. It didn't work. Good. Any new threats or competency challenges? Nothing direct, but lots of implications that I'm not thinking clearly due to age and emotional distress. Standard playbook for families trying to overturn estate planning decisions. Document everything and keep me posted. The next morning brought yet another unexpected development. I woke to the sound of voices in the kitchen, but instead of the usual whispered conversations between Marcus and Sophia, I could hear multiple people talking animatedly. When I climbed the stairs, I found Marcus, Sophia, and two people I didn't recognize sitting around the kitchen table with coffee and what appeared to be legal documents. "Good morning," I said pleasantly. I didn't realize we were having company for breakfast. Marcus looked up with an expression that mixed embarrassment with defiance. "Mom, these are our attorneys. David Chen and Sarah Walsh from Morrison, Chen and Associates. We've retained them to help us understand our legal options in this situation." I poured myself a coffee and sat down at the table uninvited. How lovely. I hope they're providing helpful advice. David Chen, a sharp-looking man in his 40s, cleared his throat. "Mrs. Davis, we're representing Marcus and Sophia in connection with the partition action you've filed. We're also exploring other legal avenues that might be available to protect the family's interests." Other legal avenues such as? Well, there are several possibilities. Competency evaluations, undue influence claims, investigations into whether anyone has been pressuring you to make decisions that aren't in your best interest. I see. And what evidence do you have that I'm incompetent or being unduly influenced? Sarah Walsh leaned forward with a sympathetic expression. "Mrs. Davis, we're not saying you're pressuring, you're incompetent. But dramatic changes in estate planning, especially when they involve disinheriting family members, often raise questions about the decision-maker's state of mind or the influence of outside parties. What dramatic changes are you referring to? Changing your will to leave everything to charity instead of your son? Filing a partition action that would force the sale of the family home? These are significant departures from your previous plans." They are. They're also rational responses to significant changes in my living situation and my understanding of how certain family members view me. David Chen made a note on his legal pad. "What changes in your living situation?" I smiled pleasantly. "Well, I was forced to move from my bedroom to the basement. My mail has been intercepted and opened without permission. I've been excluded from decisions about my own home. And I overheard conversations in which my death was discussed as an anticipated financial windfall." The attorneys exchanged glances. Clearly, Marcus and Sophia hadn't provided them with all the relevant details about the family dynamics that had led to my decisions. "Mrs. Davis," Sarah Walsh said carefully, "families sometimes have tensions about living arrangements and financial planning. But those tensions don't necessarily justify such drastic legal actions. What would justify them in your opinion?" Well, that would depend on the specific circumstances. But generally speaking, disinheritance is considered an extreme response that should be reserved for cases of genuine abuse or abandonment. I see. And how would you classify intercepting someone's mail, forcing them out of their bedroom, and discussing their death as a business opportunity? David Chen made more notes. "Mrs. Davis, we'd need to investigate these claims more thoroughly before we could advise our clients about their validity. By all means, investigate away. I'm happy to provide documentation, witness statements, and police reports to support every claim I've made." "Police reports?" Marcus asked, his voice strained. "Yes, I filed a report about the mail theft. Officer Martinez was very interested in the evidence I provided." Sophia looked like she was about to be sick. "You involved the police?" "I reported a crime. That's what responsible citizens do when they discover criminal activity." The attorneys were now taking notes frantically, clearly realizing that their clients had significantly understated the legal complications of their situation. "Mrs. Davis," David Chen said, Would you be willing to sit down with us for a more formal interview about these allegations? I'd be happy to. I should mention that my attorney will be present, and everything will be recorded for accuracy. Your attorney? Rebecca Martinez. I'm sure you know her reputation. Both attorneys looked uncomfortable. Rebecca was indeed well known in the legal community, particularly for her skill in estate planning and elder law cases. Of course, Sarah Walsh said. We'd welcome the opportunity to discuss this situation with Ms. Martinez. After the attorneys left, promising to be in touch about scheduling formal interviews, Marcus and Sophia sat in the kitchen looking like they'd just received devastating news. This is getting out of hand, Marcus said quietly. It was already out of hand when you decided to treat me like an inconvenient tenant in my own home, I replied. Now it's just becoming properly documented. We never meant for things to get this complicated. What did you mean for, exactly? What was your ideal outcome when you started discussing my death as a financial opportunity and planning to ship me off to a nursing home? We just wanted everyone to be happy, Sophia said weakly. Everyone, except me, apparently. I left them to contemplate their rapidly deteriorating legal position and returned to my basement room to call Rebecca with an update on the morning's developments. They've lawyered up, I told her. Morrison, Chen and Associates. I know that firm. Competent but not particularly creative. They're probably advising caution while they assess the strength of their position. Which isn't very strong given the evidence we have. Exactly. The fact that you've documented everything, filed police reports, and have multiple witnesses to their behavior makes any competency challenge extremely difficult to pursue. They're probably realizing that their best option is to accept the partition and try to salvage what they can from the house sale. How long before they reach that conclusion? A few weeks, probably. Their attorneys will need time to investigate, interview witnesses, and assess the evidence. Once they realize how solid your position is, they'll start advising settlement rather than litigation. And if they don't? Then we go to court and let a judge decide whether forcing your elderly mother into the basement while intercepting her mail and planning her institutional care represents the kind of family behavior that deserves to be rewarded with inheritance. The thought of Marcus and Sophia trying to explain their actions to a judge was deeply satisfying. They'd spent months treating me like a problem to be managed rather than a person to be respected. Now they'd have to defend that treatment to objective third parties who had no financial interest in their inheritance prospects. That afternoon, I received a call from Dr. Patterson's office, confirming the appointment I'd requested for a comprehensive cognitive evaluation. The receptionist mentioned that the doctor had specifically requested extended time for the appointment and would be conducting a full battery of tests to assess my mental acuity and decision-making capacity. Mrs. Davis, the receptionist said, Dr. Patterson wanted me to mention that she can provide a detailed written report of the evaluation results if you need documentation for legal purposes. That would be very helpful. Thank you. The appointment was scheduled for the following week, which would give me time to prepare and ensure that Rebecca could attend as my advocate. Having a clean bill of mental health from Marcus's own family physician would effectively end any competency challenges before they could gain traction. As I hung up the phone, I reflected on how completely the situation had transformed over the past week. 7 days ago, Marcus and Sophia had been confident that they could pressure me into accepting their vision of my future. They'd seen me as an aging woman whose judgment was declining and whose options were limited. Now they were facing criminal investigations, civil litigation, and the loss of both their inheritance and their home. Their attempts to discredit me had backfired, their recruited allies had abandoned them, and their legal position was deteriorating rapidly. The irony wasn't lost on me. In their eagerness to claim my assets, they'd forced me to demonstrate exactly how capable and resourceful I still was. Their treatment of me as a helpless elderly victim had motivated me to prove that I was anything but helpless. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and probably new attempts to pressure me into changing my decisions. But tonight, for the first time in months, I felt completely in control of my own destiny, and that feeling was worth more than any inheritance I could have left behind. 3 weeks later, I sat in Dr. Patterson's office reviewing the results of my comprehensive cognitive evaluation. The testing had been thorough and, frankly, enjoyable. Memory assessments, problem-solving exercises, logical reasoning tasks, and detailed psychological interviews had confirmed what I already knew. My mind was as sharp as it had ever been. "Mrs. Davis," Dr. Patterson said, sliding a thick report across her desk, "I want to apologize for the awkward situation at your home a few weeks ago. I should never have discussed your mental state without conducting a proper evaluation first." "Apology accepted. What do the test results show?" "You scored in the 95th percentile for your age group in all cognitive areas. Your memory, reasoning ability, and decision-making capacity are all well above average. There's absolutely no evidence of cognitive decline, confusion, or impaired judgment." I flipped through the detailed report, noting the charts and graphs that documented my performance on each test. "And you'll provide this report to my attorney?" "Already done. I sent a copy to Ms. Martinez this morning, along with a cover letter stating my professional opinion that you are fully competent to make your own legal and financial decisions." The timing was perfect. Rebecca had called that morning to inform me that Marcus and Sophia's attorneys were preparing to file a motion for guardianship proceedings, claiming I was mentally incompetent and potentially being manipulated by outside parties. Dr. Patterson's evaluation would destroy that strategy before it could gain momentum. My phone buzzed with a text from Rebecca. "Received the doctor's report. Outstanding results. The other side's attorneys want to meet tomorrow to discuss settlement options. Are you available at 10? I typed back, "I'll be there." The next morning found me sitting in Rebecca's conference room across from David Chen and Sarah Walsh, who both looked considerably less confident than they had in my kitchen 3 weeks earlier. Marcus and Sophia sat beside their attorneys, avoiding eye contact with me. "Mrs. Davis," David Chen began, "we've had a chance to review the evidence and documentation you've provided. We've also seen Dr. Patterson's evaluation report. Our clients wanted to meet today to discuss possible resolution of the outstanding legal issues." "I'm listening." Sarah Walsh opened a folder and pulled out several documents. "We'd like to propose a settlement agreement that addresses everyone's concerns while avoiding lengthy and expensive litigation." "What kind of settlement?" "First, Marcus and Sophia would agree not to contest the partition action. The house would be sold as you've requested, and proceeds divided equally among the 3 owners." "That's not a concession," I pointed out. "They don't have any legal basis to contest the partition." "True," David Chen admitted, "but they could delay the process significantly with procedural challenges, which would be costly for everyone involved." "Continue." "Second, they would agree to move out of the house within 60 days, allowing you to remain there during the sale process if you choose." I considered this offer. Moving back upstairs and reclaiming my home during the transition period had appeal, but I'd already found an apartment I liked and had no desire to share space with them for another few months. I'm not interested in living with people who've demonstrated such disrespect for me. "What else?" Sarah Walsh consulted her notes. "They're also prepared to make a formal written apology, acknowledging that their behavior toward you was inappropriate and hurtful." "A written apology. How sincere?" Marcus finally spoke up. "Mom, we are sorry, really sorry. We didn't realize how our actions were affecting you, and we want to make things right." "What things specifically are you sorry for, Marcus?" He shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "For making you feel unwelcome in your own home, for not including you in decisions about household arrangements, for—" He glanced at Sophia, who nodded encouragingly. "For discussing your death in a way that was disrespectful and hurtful. And for suggesting that you needed to be in a care facility when you're perfectly capable of living independently. And for intercepting my mail. Yes, that too." I looked at Sophia, who had remained silent throughout the apology. "Do you have anything to add, Sophia?" "I'm sorry for everything Marcus said," she replied stiffly. "I was young and stupid and didn't understand how my words would sound to you." The non-apology was telling. Even now, faced with the collapse of all her schemes, Sophia couldn't bring herself to take genuine responsibility for her actions. "I appreciate the apologies," I said. "But I'm curious about what you expect in return." David Chen leaned forward eagerly. "In exchange for their acknowledgement of wrongdoing and agreement to cooperate with the house sale, we're hoping you might consider revising your will to include some provision for Marcus." "What kind of provision?" Perhaps a partial inheritance. Maybe half to Charity and half to Marcus. Or some other division that reflects your charitable intentions while still providing for your son's future. I sat quietly for a moment, considering the offer. From a purely financial perspective, it wasn't unreasonable. Marcus would still receive a substantial inheritance, just not the entirety of my estate as he'd originally expected. But the proposal missed the fundamental point of my decisions. This wasn't a negotiation about money. It was about respect, character, and the kind of behavior that should be rewarded or punished. I appreciate the offer, I said finally, but I'm not interested in a settlement that treats my will changes as a bargaining chip. Mrs. Davis, Sarah Walsh said urgently, I think you should consider the long-term implications of completely disinheriting your son. Family relationships can be repaired, but cutting off all financial ties makes reconciliation much more difficult. If our relationship can only be repaired through the promise of inheritance, then it's not a relationship worth having. Marcus looked stricken. Mom, that's not fair. I know I made mistakes, but I'm still your son. Doesn't that count for anything? Being my son means you had advantages and opportunities that other people didn't have. It doesn't mean you're entitled to my assets regardless of how you treat me. But we've apologized, we've acknowledged our mistakes. What more can we do? You can demonstrate through your actions over time that you've learned from those mistakes. You can show respect and appreciation not because you expect to be rewarded for it, but because it's the right way to treat people you claim to love. How can we do that if you've already decided we're going to inherit nothing? Sophia demanded. What's our incentive to change if the outcome is going to be the same regardless? The question revealed everything that was wrong with their approach. They still saw respectful behavior as a transaction, rather than a basic human obligation. If your only motivation for treating me well is the expectation of financial reward, then you've proven exactly why my decision was correct. Rebecca, who had been quietly taking notes throughout the meeting, finally spoke up. My client has made her position clear. She's not interested in negotiating about inheritance, because inheritance isn't the issue. The issue is behavior and character. Then what is she interested in discussing? David Chen asked. Nothing, I said simply. I'm satisfied with my current legal position and my current decisions. You can either accept them or continue fighting battles you can't win. The meeting ended without agreement, but I could see the resignation in both attorneys' faces. They'd realized that I wasn't motivated by spite or temporary anger, but by a fundamental reassessment of family relationships based on observed behavior. 2 months later, the house sold for $2.7 million, slightly above our asking price. The proceeds were divided equally among the 3 owners, giving each of us approximately $900,000. Marcus and Sophia had moved into a small apartment across town, their dreams of inheriting a mansion replaced by the reality of making their own way financially. I used my share of the house proceeds to purchase a beautiful 2-bedroom condominium downtown, with large windows overlooking the river and enough space for my books, my grandmother's furniture, and my growing collection of houseplants. For the first time in decades, I was living in a space that reflected my taste, rather than accommodating someone else's preferences. The freedom was intoxicating. I could eat dinner at whatever time I chose, watch television at any volume one liked, and invite friends over without asking permission or worrying about disturbing anyone. My mail arrived safely in my own mailbox, my telephone rang only for me, and every decision about my living space was mine alone to make. Marcus called occasionally, usually brief conversations, where he updated me on his job search and their apartment hunting progress. Sophia had apparently found part-time work at a boutique, her first job ever, and was struggling with the concept of earning her own money rather than spending someone else's. How are you adjusting to your new place? I asked during one of these calls. It's different, Marcus admitted. Smaller than we're used to, and the neighborhood isn't as nice. But we're managing. Good. Learning to live within your means is an important life skill. Mom, I've been thinking about what you said at the settlement meeting, about demonstrating change through actions over time. I want you to know that I'm trying to be a better person. I'm glad to hear that, Marcus. What does that look like in practice? Well, I'm taking more responsibility for household decisions instead of letting Sophia make all the choices. I'm working harder at my job instead of just coasting and expecting inheritance to solve our financial problems. And I'm trying to understand why you felt so disrespected by our behavior. And what conclusions have you reached? I think we treated you like an inconvenience instead of a person. We made decisions about your life without considering your feelings or preferences. And we talked about your money like it was already ours instead of appreciating the sacrifices you made to earn it. The acknowledgement was more thoughtful than I'd expected, suggesting that Marcus might actually be learning from the experience rather than just serving time until I forgave him. Those are important realizations, I said. What are you planning to do with them? I don't know yet. I guess I'm hoping that someday you'll be willing to have a relationship with me that isn't based on inheritance or money. Just mother and son, getting to know each other again. I'd like that too, Marcus. But it will take time to rebuild trust, and it will require consistent behavior rather than grand gestures. I understand. I'm not expecting forgiveness right away. I just wanted you to know that I'm working on becoming someone worthy of it. The conversation gave me more hope than I'd felt in months. Perhaps Marcus was finally beginning to understand that relationships couldn't be based on expectations and entitlements, but required ongoing effort and mutual respect. 6 months after the house sale, Rebecca called with interesting news about the foundation I'd established with my estate planning. The Elder Justice Foundation has received its first grant application, she reported. A 67-year-old woman in Springfield whose daughter-in-law has been financially abusing her for 3 years. She needs legal assistance to protect her assets and housing. How much does she need? About $15,000 for legal fees and relocation costs. The foundation board has approved the grant, but I wanted you to know since you're the founder. Perfect. Are there other applications? Several. Word is getting out that there's financial assistance available for elderly people dealing with family financial abuse. We're seeing cases similar to yours, where adult children or their spouses are manipulating elderly relatives to gain access to their assets. The irony was perfect. The money that Marcus and Sophia had expected to inherit was now being used to help other elderly people protect themselves from exactly the kind of manipulation I'd experienced. Any interesting cases? There's a 73-year-old man whose son moved into his house and started charging him rent to live in his own home. A 65-year-old woman whose daughter-in-law has been stealing her Social Security checks. An 80-year-old woman whose grandson convinced her to sign over power of attorney and then emptied her bank accounts. How much money do we have available for grants? With the returns on investment and additional donations from other families who've dealt with similar issues, we're up to about $6 million. We could help a lot of people. The foundation was exceeding my wildest expectations. Not only was my money going to people who genuinely needed it, but it was being multiplied by donations from other families who understood the importance of protecting elderly people from financial abuse. A year after moving out of my basement room, I received an unexpected visitor. Marcus appeared at my apartment door on a Saturday afternoon, looking nervous but determined. "Hi, Mom. I was hoping we could talk." "Of course. Come in." He looked around my living room, taking in the comfortable furniture, the family photos, and the general atmosphere of contentment I'd created. "This is really nice. It suits you." "Thank you. I'm very happy here." "I can see that. You look more relaxed than I've seen you in years." We sat down with coffee, and Marcus updated me on his life. He'd been promoted at work, taking on more responsibility and earning a significant raise. He and Sophia had moved to a larger apartment, and were actually saving money rather than spending beyond their means. Sophia's been working full-time for 6 months now, he said. It's been good for her. She's learning the value of earning money rather than just spending it. "How is your marriage?" Marcus was quiet for a moment. "Different. Better in some ways. We've had to learn to work together, instead of just assuming everything would be taken care of for us. It's made us both more mature." "I'm glad to hear that." "Mom, I have something I want to show you." He pulled out his phone and opened a banking app, showing me a savings account balance. "We've saved $43,000 in the past year. It's not much compared to what we thought we'd inherit, but it's money we earned ourselves." I looked at the number with genuine pride. "That's wonderful, Marcus. You should be proud of that accomplishment." I am, and I wanted you to know that we're planning to buy a house next year. A modest house that we can actually afford, not something we'd need inheritance to pay for. That sounds like an excellent plan. I also wanted to tell you about something else. He pulled out a folded paper from his jacket pocket. I've been volunteering at the senior center downtown, helping elderly people with their finances and protecting them from scams. The coordinator said I have a good understanding of how financial abuse works. I read the letter he handed me, a glowing recommendation from the senior center director, praising Marcus's work with vulnerable elderly clients. This is impressive, Marcus. What motivated you to start volunteering there? I wanted to understand what we put you through from a different perspective. Working with other elderly people who've been mistreated by their families has shown me how awful our behavior really was. And what have you learned? That what we did to you wasn't just thoughtless or inconsiderate. It was a form of abuse. We systematically undermined your autonomy, invaded your privacy, and treated you like an asset rather than a person. I'm ashamed of that. And I want to spend the rest of my life making sure other elderly people don't go through what we put you through. The sincerity in his voice was unmistakable. This wasn't a performance designed to manipulate me into changing my will. It was genuine remorse combined with meaningful action. I'm proud of the work you're doing, I said, but I want you to understand that I'm not going to change my will because of it. I know, he said quickly. That's not why I'm here. I wanted you to know that I finally understand why you made the decisions you did, and I think they were the right decisions. You think disinheriting you was the right decision? I think holding us accountable for our behavior was the right decision. Whether that's through disinheritance or other consequences doesn't matter. What matters is that actions have consequences, and we needed to learn that. What about Sophia? Has she reached the same conclusions? Marcus sighed. Sophia is still working on it. She understands intellectually that we were wrong, but she's having a harder time accepting that the consequences are permanent. She keeps hoping that eventually you'll forgive us and change your mind about the inheritance. And what do you tell her? I tell her that forgiveness and inheritance are separate issues. You might forgive us someday, but that doesn't mean you owe us your money. We need to build lives that aren't dependent on inheriting wealth we never earned. The conversation continued for another hour, covering everything from Marcus's job to his marriage to his plans for the future. For the first time in years, we talked like mother and son, rather than adversaries in a financial dispute. As he prepared to leave, Marcus paused at the door. Mom, I want you to know that I love you. Not because of what you might leave me, but because of who you are and everything you've done for me. I'm sorry it took losing my inheritance for me to realize that. I love you too, Marcus. And I'm proud of the man you're becoming. After he left, I sat in my comfortable living room and reflected on how completely our relationship had transformed. The crisis that had nearly destroyed our family had ultimately forced Marcus to grow up and take responsibility for his choices and behavior. The foundation continued to thrive, helping dozens of elderly people protect themselves from financial abuse and manipulation. My own life had settled into a peaceful routine of reading, volunteering, and enjoying the independence I'd reclaimed. 6 months later, I received another visit from Marcus, this time with news that surprised me. Sophia and I are getting divorced, he announced without preamble. I'm sorry to hear that. Are you all right? Actually, I'm relieved. We've been growing in different directions this past year. I've been focused on building a life based on work and personal growth, and she's been focused on finding ways to get back the lifestyle she thought she was entitled to. What does that mean practically? It means she's been looking for another wealthy man to marry. She met someone at the boutique where she works, a customer whose wife died last year. He's 74 years old and owns several businesses. I couldn't help but smile at the poetic justice. So she's found another inheritance to pursue. Exactly. And when I realized that she hadn't actually learned anything from our experience with you, I knew our marriage was over. How are you handling the divorce proceedings? It's pretty straightforward. We don't have much to fight over since we've been renting and don't have significant assets. The money from the house sale is already in separate accounts. And your plans for the future? I'm going to buy a small house with my share of the house proceeds and my savings. Nothing fancy, but something that's mine. I'm also thinking about going back to school for a degree in social work, so I can expand my work with elderly clients. The transformation was remarkable. The entitled young man who'd married for money and expected to inherit wealth had become someone focused on meaningful work and personal integrity. I think that's an excellent plan, Marcus. I'm proud of the choices you're making. Thanks, Mom. I wanted you to know that even though Sophia and I are divorcing, my commitment to being a better person isn't changing. If anything, it's easier to focus on what's important, without someone constantly pressuring me to find ways to regain the inheritance. 2 years after leaving my basement room, I hosted my first family dinner in my new apartment. Marcus came alone, bringing flowers and a bottle of wine. We cooked together, something we hadn't done since he was a teenager, and talked about books, current events, and his work at the senior center. The foundation helped another client this week, he mentioned over dessert. An elderly man whose stepchildren were trying to force him into a nursing home so they could sell his house. Did we have enough funding to assist him? More than enough. Between the legal fees and relocation costs, we spent about $20,000. He's now living safely in a senior community he chose for himself. That's wonderful. How many people have we helped so far? 43 individuals or families. The foundation has become a blamile model for other cities looking to address elder financial abuse. The irony continued to delight me. My decision to disinherit the family members who'd abused me had created a legacy far more meaningful than simply passing wealth to the next generation. As Marcus prepared to leave that evening, he paused to look at a framed photo on my mantelpiece. It was a picture of the two of us from his college graduation, both of us smiling proudly at his accomplishment. I miss those days sometimes, he said quietly, when our relationship was simpler. It's not simpler now, I agreed. But it's more honest. And ultimately, that's more important than simple. Do you think you'll ever consider changing your will? The question didn't surprise me. Despite his growth and changed behavior, Marcus was still human, and humans naturally hope for forgiveness and second chances. I don't know, I said honestly. My decisions weren't made in anger, and they won't be changed by temporary good behavior. If you continue growing and demonstrating genuine character change over years rather than months, perhaps we can revisit the question. How many years? I don't know. But Marcus, I want you to understand something important. Even if I never change my will, even if you never inherit a penny from me, I'm prouder of the man you've become in the past 2 years than I was of anything you accomplished when you expected to inherit my wealth. Why? Because everything you're doing now, you're doing because you chose to do it. You're working hard because you value accomplishment, not because you expect to be rewarded. You're helping other people because you care about them, not because you think it will benefit you. You're becoming the person I always hoped you could be. Marcus wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. I love you, Mom. Thank you for not giving up on me. I never gave up on you. I just stopped enabling you. As I watched him drive away that night, I reflected on the unexpected gift that Sophia's cruelty had given us both. Her casual discussion of my death had forced me to take action that ultimately transformed our entire family dynamic. The money I'd planned to leave to Marcus was now helping dozens of elderly people protect themselves from the kind of abuse I'd experienced. Marcus had learned to stand on his own feet and build a life based on his own efforts rather than inherited wealth. And our relationship, though forever changed, was built on a foundation of mutual respect rather than financial dependency. The basement room where I'd spent those humiliating months seemed like a lifetime ago. The woman who'd allowed herself to be pushed around and marginalized had been replaced by someone who understood her own worth and wasn't afraid to protect it. 3 years later, when Marcus announced his engagement to a social worker he'd met at a conference on elder care, I knew that my decision to force him to grow up had been the right one. His fiancée, Jennifer, was someone who shared his values and his commitment to meaningful work rather than material wealth. She knows about everything that happened with us, he told me when he brought her to meet me. About how I treated you, about the inheritance, about why you made the decisions you did. And what does she think about all that? She thinks you were brave to hold me accountable. She said most parents would have just enabled the behavior because it's easier than enforcing consequences. Jennifer turned out to be everything Sophia wasn't. Intelligent, kind, hardworking, and genuinely interested in building a life based on shared values rather than financial gain. When they married the following year, I attended the wedding with genuine joy for their future together. The Elder Justice Foundation had grown beyond my wildest dreams, helping hundreds of elderly people and inspiring similar programs in other states. My decision to redirect my inheritance had created a legacy that would outlast any amount of money I could have left to my son. And Marcus, the entitled young man who'd once discussed shipping me off to a nursing home, had become someone I was genuinely proud to call my son. Not because he'd inherited my values, but because he'd chosen to develop them himself. 5 years after climbing out of that basement room, I could honestly say that losing my family's respect had taught me to value my own. And that lesson, it turned out, was worth far more than any inheritance I could have left behind. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.